Warcrow from Corvus Belli is a game I've been following with mixed interest since the Kickstarter of Warcrow Adventures about 2 years ago, which is fulfilling and releasing to retail soon. It was fun, but I found the dice mechanics a little bit challenging because, frankly, it was pretty confusing and I'm colorblind and like 3 of the dice look the same color to me. It's a little bit awkward. It was using mechanics also that I hadn't come across before, as it was actually the first dungeon runner I've ever really played, I think. And I had to learn the rules totally in a vacuum on my own with the prototype version. Also at the time, I had my focus squarely in sci-fi, and when I get a clash in theme, I struggle. However, as time and my interests and tastes have moved on, I came to start wanting something a little bit more complex than simply like roll a 4 up in my wargaming, and I wanted some fantasy with a bit of depth, and for whatever reason, Warcrow, the wargame, instead of adventures, began to capture my interest as we saw their starter factions fleshed out and the aesthetic shown off a little bit more clearly than it was in Adventures. Whereas, like from Adventures, for example, whereas from the Adventures game, I didn't come away with a strong understanding of the world and the factions. The war game, however, made everything clearer. Suddenly, I see how the hegemony? I'll Google it, of Embasig look, and I'm into it. I think some of the dwarves are super cool, whereas I didn't really like the dwarf from the Adventures game. The orcs are a great take on a realistic looking orc instead of more cartoony takes from other companies perhaps, although I love those too. And yeah, just everything from a world building perspective fell into place as the faction identities revealed themselves. And let's be honest, for most wargamers, the setting and the cool models is what we need. The mechanics are mandatory, they need to be there, but really they just need to not frustrate us. They're not the reason, right? So anyway, in this video, I want to go over what I think are some mechanics that I think are pretty cool or worthy of note in some way. And then, because I sometimes like to imagine I'm not just a wargaming shill for every single thing I look at, I'm going to finish on a few critiques. Oh, super quick, sorry. If you don't know what Warcrow is, it is a fantasy game focused on the squad level. So thematically it's a bit larger than individual skirmish, but nowhere near a full army. They've said that you should expect to have 15 models aside, roughly, with your units being 3 model units. So we can maybe guess there would be 8 activations aside, perhaps? It takes place in the world of Lindworm, and it's a traditional fantasy with the current focus being on humans, orcs, and demons. There are also elves and dwarves, we know for sure. But they're not releasing straight up front, kind of, as their own fact. It's a thing. The whole concept of the world is an evil mist has started creeping through the land, and where it goes, these demons follow, wiping out all living things. A classic. That's alongside the standard high fantasy political machinations and empire building from the different empire states. Cool. Right, on to the cool mechanics. Magic has to come first. They have been super reluctant to tell us how magic works with almost no information released until now, because we got the full core book, right? However, until we see the potency of the spells, we still don't know if they kind of will all be worth the hassle. Every time you cast a spell, you must make a willpower roll against a tinge roll. You can make casting a spell very safe or basically guaranteed to blow your spellcaster up. All spells are customizable with a potential 6 alterations. We now know what tinge is and does. When you cast a spell and you roll the number of dice as your willpower stat, your opponent will roll for the tinge test, and the tinge test will be a black dice for every level of tinge you're up against. Roll additional dice for every alteration you want the spell to have, and for every tinge token on your model, up to a maximum of 9 potential dice. To successfully cast the spell, you need to have a single successful hit, remembering that the defense dice will remove a successful hit if they have a successful block. But if you get any hollow hits, they apply a tinge token to you, and if there are any hollow crits, the effect of the tinge occurs after the spell goes off, even if you would otherwise pass the tinge test. Normally, you have to check for the tinge effects at the start of each round. Not immediately, but you will now, because you rolled a hollow crit. These are pretty punishing, mainly involving adding stress to yourself and everyone around you. But I can see a possible magic missile tactic of charging your caster straight into the enemy lines and trying to blow up. After the tinge test, an enemy can attempt to counter your spell. They will also have to take a tinge test to counter you, and then it's a willpower roll-off. They take the stress as well, etc. So again, we don't actually know the effects of any spells really, like in the broader scope of things, or the full range of them. We can assume magic effects will range from simply being powerful range damage to debuffs to enemies or buffs to friendlies of all sorts, whether it be stats or teleporting or status effects like disarmed or demoralized. The alterations you can apply are things like not needing line of sight for the spell, or it guaranteed to be cast without a willpower roll, increase the range, the duration, all these sorts of things. So let's say you have a willpower of 2 orange and you already have 1 tinge token from a previous cast and the enemy is out of range and behind a building. Your tinge roll would be kind of naturally 1 black, plus 1 black for the tinge token on you, plus 1 black for the range alteration, and plus 1 blue for the 4th alteration to show the difficulty going up every 3rd dice in the pool. So it's a very customizable experience when it comes to casting spells. You can modify it for your particular risk appetite. It seems there's no way to just straight up supercharge a spell or add damage, but you can add other things as you want. Okay, number 2, stress. I'm stressed. I'm a sucker for stress because it makes me think of X-Wing, and that's good stuff. Stress in Warcrow isn't quite as impactful, but it has the same basic concept. Every round is made up of a number of player turns as defined by the mission you're playing. So far, that's either 4 or 5 turns in the round. A turn is player 1 activates 1 unit, then player 2 activates 1 unit, and alternate those 4 or 5 times, then the round ends, depending on the mission again. Every unit can only activate once per round, unless you want to give them a stress token to activate a second time each round. Also, many attacks will have a stress symbol in them, which means that when making the attack, you can choose to take a stress to apply that effect. Typically, it will be something like roll an extra dice or get an extra hit, that kind of thing. Most units can take 2 stress before needing to roll a willpower check, heroes 3, which is something you really don't want to fail, by the way, as you can become demoralized and then run away. An interesting use of my psyche to apply to their wargaming, I feel. There are other ways to gain stress, and you can apply stress to enemies as well, but in general, I really like the concept in a game of where you can push your models to do more for now, for a negative later. As long as the stress remains impactful in the sense of being both worth taking and difficult, but sometimes the best thing to do to remove stress, this is a great mechanic, really like it. We then come to movement. Now, I like the movement system. It's an interesting way to define units, as in measurement units, not units troops. You have 2 numbers and you can only move in a straight line. Put down your movement widget. Move the first number and place your base anywhere touching the widget. Then move the second number. So if you've tried to hide your model behind a building, perhaps, but your first move is 3 and the second move is 1, well, you're going to be spending most of your move getting out of cover. But if you're perhaps a more balanced 2-2, then you're actually quite flexible. Another interesting way to define factions and units, I quite like it. Another lever to pull. Attacks. As I mentioned at the start, when I played Adventures, I found myself a bit lost with the dice. It could be that the hero cards gave lots of options to a struggling mind, and these cards are simpler with only kind of 1 attack really. But in essence, nothing has changed since I played Adventures to when I played this Absolute 2 months ago, month ago. But now, I like it. There you go, I don't know. It gives the game a bit more depth than a simple roll of, 3+, right? I like that, that's nice. I still don't really understand the need for switches, if I'm honest. Switches allow you to change certain symbols to other symbols, but there's never a negative to doing the switch. Let's quickly go to complaints though, okay? I've got 2 accessibility issues which need to be mentioned first because they're simple oversights from Corvus Belli. 1 in 10 men are colourblind. I made that stat up, go with it. With red-green being the most common version, that bit's true. None of that 1/10 of the population are on the Corvus Belli team, I guarantee you. I am finding so many clashes with my colourblindness in the rule system. The dice are bad, like, it's a genuine accessibility issue. But I'm a big boy, I've learned to live my life, whatever. But I can't tell the difference between the orange and green dice. I'll figure it out, I'll get a system. I will just play slower and I will sometimes roll the wrong dice because yes, in this game sometimes you roll a defense dice when attacking, so it's not as simple as have an attacking and defending pile of dice, right? But what makes me bring this up again is that when I looked over the missions, they have put red objectives on what I assume is a green background. I genuinely cannot see these red objectives. Even if you're fully committed to using this exact shade and hue of red against this exact shade and hue of green, you could have just put a white border around the red. Fixed. Anyway, whatever. Accessibility issues. Continuing with accessibility issues, tiny card text. It's tiny. Like, it's really, really small. It's petite. I can read them just fine, not an issue for me, but I can definitely see this being an issue for those with worse eyesight than myself. The saving grace here is that I am guessing this was all designed to be digital in the app, so it will work fine from there where you might be able to zoom in on the cards, right? But yeah, and that's all going to be free as we know. Looking at a card with such tiny text doesn't grab attention, that's kind of all I'm saying. It doesn't look easy and good and fun. I'm all for a more complicated, less streamlined fantasy wargame, but that doesn't mean you make the graphic design worse. Let's talk about base sizes and overhang. This is a practicality issue that I came across even in my quick demo game at Salute. Warcrow works by having your base touch an enemy base or your base touch cover to gain that cover. Great, love the simplicity, no measuring. Why measure when it's not needed? However, every single model so far overhangs the base in at least one place. It was the tip of a sword, whatever, no big deal, but when I played my test game at Salute, I legitimately could not get certain models to actually be base to base due to the overhangs of the two models. This seemed like a real shame where mechanics and model design didn't quite line up. It's fine, we will all be able to know they should be in base to base. But an odd oversight to keep in your game that had fixes on both sides of the aisle, either making every model's base one stride bigger or adding in a one stride engagement range. I don't know. While we're talking about bases, the movement widget. So although I do like the movement system and the widget is nice, good inclusion, and I'm okay with 15mm being your basic measurement in the game, that's one stride is 15mm, but the widget itself isn't functional. This is kind of alongside the overhang issue above, right? But your base is supposed to end up touching the widget, and when moving 2 strides, that basically isn't possible. This will easily be able to be fixed. I would recommend cutting up your spare GW plastic sprue into the different lengths you need. So it's not actually a big issue, but one to note so that you could cut that sprue up now. Final complaint, and I will die on this hill, but they have called their elf faction the Gay. The GAE. This is at best a Spanish to English issue, at worst a joke and absolute genuine cringe. You cannot call a race that is normally associated with effeminate men with perfect skin and stunning cheekbones the Gay Assail. They need to fix this for the English language. Thank you. And that's Warcrow. A few minor issues and nitpicks, but nothing big enough to make me not interested in the game, that's for sure. And simply things that could be looked at when revamping the game. All in all, I'm very excited for it, and I hope it finds a place among the fantasy wargaming crowd as its own unique thing. And I think it's safe to say that Corvus Belli can be counted on as one of the few companies out there with the knowledge base to launch a successful wargame. Also, they do super good and cool looking how to play videos, so I might not even have to do one myself. I probably still will, but it will be definitively worse than theirs, which isn't something you can say for most companies' own how to play videos. They're normally very lackluster. Thanks for watching. Suck my tinge.